Hi everyone. I'm gonna wait a little bit so folks can get on. Welcome to today's cooking class. Yay, one person's joining. I don't have an assistant today, so if the technology goes off the rails a little bit, we'll just have to troubleshoot. But we're gonna wait for a couple more folks to hop on here, but I'm so excited to be joining y'all today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is preservation, specifically pickling. So today we're going to be talking about 2 ways to preserve the bounty of your CSA, and it's all about pickles. And we're going to do a couple different kinds. We're going to go over how to do some lactofermentation, which is the most ancient and for many people around the world a sacred tradition of preserving the harvest so that you can enjoy it all year round. And the second one is simple vinegar pickling. Both are brines and both are a little different. And we're going to be utilizing produce that you are going to be finding in your Sola Gratia CSA boxes and at farmers markets this summer. So my name is Kaitie Adams, and I am a local farmer and agroforester here in Central Illinois. I'm also farm manager John's wife. So I used to be a veggie farmer, and I started really loving all the things I could do with the leftover bounty of the harvest. So I ran Wash Pack, as well as managed a small vegetable operation, and we were always getting these beautiful produce that we couldn't sell to our wholesale or market customers, and I was constantly bringing home a ton of veggies, and this is when I learned how to start fermenting. You might hear my cat in the background, hopefully. Oh, there she is. You gotta get off. Sorry, Saskatoon. So I got really interested in pickling and fermenting, and so I'm excited to share some of the easiest things that you can do in your home kitchen. So today we're gonna be making sauerkraut from some phenomenal Sola Gratia cabbage. We are going to be making pickles 2 ways. So these are silver slicers, as well as your traditional pickling cucumber. We're going to be pickling some tomatoes. So these are green tomatoes, which you're going to get later in the season, and not so much now when we're at the height of tomato season. And we're also going to be kicking up the heat a little bit with some pickled jalapenos and some beautiful carrots. So we're going to start with something that is near and dear to my heart, which is lactofermentation. So when when people hear lactofermentation, they're like, ooh, lactose. Does it have to do with milk or some sort of cultured cream sort of thing? But it's called lactofermentation because this process was discovered first with milk and good bacteria that were eating the milk sugars in dairy products, but you don't have to have milk to do really nutritious, really delicious lactofermentation. All you need is water, salt, and vegetables. That's it. So sauerkraut is a really great starter ferment to get you going because it's really easy. 3 ingredients: water, salt, cabbage. And it's something that you really can't mess up because there's so much water content in this beautiful vegetable and just the right amounts of sugar, then it's really easy not to over ferment. So you could literally leave it, which I have for months and months at a time, and it's still gonna taste great, maybe a little sour. So for example, this is sauerkraut that I made last year, and I make huge batches right before we go into winter to keep my gut nice and healthy. So one of the main reasons why kind of fermentation has become trendy and has sort of been revitalized is because the good bacteria that we cultivate within lactofermentation is really great for increasing the gut microbiome. So we have all of this fungus and bacteria and all of these things that keep our guts moving healthy. There's bad ones, and those are the ones that make you sick. And there's good ones that help support your immune and digestive system. So this is one way to ensure that all the great bacteria stays in here, as well as the nutrients that are in these vegetables. So we know that Sola Gratia has incredibly nutrient-rich vegetables, so this is just one way to preserve it. Ooh, Andrea has a great question. Do you have to have salt? For lactofermentation, you actually don't have to have salt, but you have to have something that kickstarts the culture. So that can be kefir, which are these little kind of molds that you can isolate and then add. So basically you need something that's going to kickstart the digestion of sugars to preserve the food itself and to keep the bad bacteria from starting to colonize your foods. So kefir is one, like the lactobacillus, which is in yogurt, is another, so you can preserve in yogurt. I'm sure there's some other ones that I'm not remembering. Sandor Katz has a really amazing book called Wild Fermentation, as well as The Art of Fermentation, and there's lots of different salt alternatives for folks that don't want to have a salt-heavy diet. Vinegar is another way that you can preserve. So like, for example, lacto-fermented foods, we do 1 quart of water to 3 tablespoons of salt. So it's not that much salt for how much you get out of here. But if you are salt averse, you can also rinse your fermented vegetables before you eat them. So I'm going to do a little bit more research and I'll get back to you, Andrea, about that. So I could talk all day about fermentation and its benefits and why it's so amazing. But let's get into actually making something. So we're going to start with sauerkraut. So what we're going to do is you want a nice big bowl, because we're going to be putting our cut cabbage into here, and we're actually going to be releasing water with our hands. So we'll take a full head of cabbage. I remove the outer leaves, but I'm keeping them aside because we're going to use them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it in half. And here you can see the core, which we don't want, mostly because it's hard and it doesn't really break down like it should. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a triangle cut out of the half, and I'm going to remove the core. This is going to go into my compost pile over here. So that core is out. Then I got my 2 halves. What I'm going to come do is I'm going to shred with my knife. You could do this with a grater, you could do this with a food processor, you could do this with a kraut board, which are amazing. If you make a ton of sauerkraut, it's totally worth getting a kraut board, where you just move it across a board with a blade. But I'm getting my claw so I don't cut my hands here, and I'm making little ribbons with the cabbage. So what that's going to look like is it's about thin like this. It really doesn't matter how thin it is. Super thin shredded cabbage is going to ferment faster than something that has a lot more mass to it. And there's a lot larger cell structures if the pieces are bigger. And you don't have to be super precise. The great thing about all these preservation methods is it doesn't really matter the size, and it doesn't really matter so much the proportions, as long as you have enough starter culture to get the party started. So we need those good forms of bacteria to really get things going. So I wish I would have had this prepped a little bit of time, but I was out harvesting thousands of pounds of currants today on one of the farms that I manage. So I didn't get home fast enough to get everything prepped up. Okay, so when I got home, Sola Gratia washes their produce, but I gave it just like one more little rinse. I would not want to use a vegetable wash. I would not want to use a bleach wash. I would not want to use a vinegar wash for these vegetables, because there's a bacterial bloom that's on the outside of these veggies. And we need that bacteria to get the fermentation party started. So don't overly wash your veggies. One of the reasons why our guts are in such dire health is because we don't get enough bacteria through our food. So much of our food is hyperwashed, it's irradiated before it comes to us, so we lose a lot of that good bacteria and fungus. Okay, so I have my bowl of shredded cabbage here. I'm gonna take my salt. I use Redmond sea salt, but you can use anything that's non-iodized. You don't want iodized salt because that kind of prevents the fermentation process from happening. And you don't want anything with an anti-caking agent because that can also inhibit it. So I don't follow a recipe for sauerkraut. So I had 2 small heads of cabbage. I'm going to start with 1 tablespoon of salt. And I'm just going to sprinkle it in there. You want it to taste as salty as the sea. That's kind of like the turn of phrase, I guess, to describe how salty you want it. So what I'm doing now is I'm using the world's best tool, my hands, and I'm coming down and I'm squeezing the cabbage, and I'm kind of running it around the bowl. So like squeeze, 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 squeeze. And what's happening is it's starting, the cell walls of the cabbage are starting to break down, and all the water that's in those cells are starting to come out. So that water that's already in the cabbage is being released, and that along with the salt is what's going to make our brine for the fermentation. So there's different ways that you can do this. When I make huge batches of sauerkraut, I still often use my hands because number 1, it's a good workout, and 2, I just like the tactile experience of making sauerkraut. I think it feels really good. So here's what we're looking like now. I don't know if you can see it very well on the Facebook, but we're starting to get some water. So like there's water dripping out. So this is perfect. This is what we want. So freshly harvested cabbage is going to have more water in it than cabbage that's been in storage. And there's nothing wrong with storage cabbage. I love that we have crops like carrots and radishes and cabbages and beets that can sit in the cooler and nourish folks for a really long time. So sometimes this comes together really fast, and sometimes it comes together really slow. But it came together fast for us today. Another tool you can use is a kraut pounder. I love this thing. So you don't want to use your hands. You can come through and just start pounding it out. So now it's an important taste test. Is it salty like the sea? Yep, it's a little too salty for my taste, which is perfect for the fermentation. That salt taste is going to go away right as it ferments. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pack this in a jar. I have a wide mouth mason jar. You don't have to use glass for lactofermentation, but I just find it pretty easy to use glass. So I really like wide mouth jars the best, but I don't have a ton of wide mouth jars and I want to save it for something else. So I'm stuffing my cabbage in here. I'm going to take my kraut pounder. I'm going to push it down. And there's a ton of water coming out, and that's what we want. We want our sauerkraut to be fully submerged within the brine. So I like my sauerkraut plain, but there's all types of things you can add to it. So one thing that I like to do, especially when we have summer kraut, is to add shredded carrots, beets, and jalapenos. They have, they break down and preserve at a similar rate, so everything stays pretty crunchy. Another thing you can do is add caraway seeds or fennel seeds or types of dill seeds to your... Hi everyone, thanks for sticking around. John and I moved to a new house and we don't have our internet set up, So I'm using my wireless connection, so I think it kicked me off. I didn't like that I was making sauerkraut. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. Okay, it worked. I'm back. Okay, so here's what it looks like in the jar. So we have our cabbage down here. We have a lot of liquid at the top. That's our brine. So I'm going to use my kraut pounder. Just put it down a little bit more. Now we saved a cabbage leaf because this is what's going to be our weight. So I'm going to throw that at the top. And this helps keep everything submerged in the brine. So we want things submerged in lactofermentation because underwater becomes an anaerobic environment. So it's devoid of oxygen. And what we do, you can also use a fermentation weight as well. So we could leave it like this, completely open, but that means you're inviting flies in. So one thing that you can do is you can buy different types of airlocks, which lets the gas and the air out and nothing else into the jar. I love these. You don't have to worry about bugs or anything getting in there. Because you take 2 paper towels and fold them over each other. Let's see if I got a paper towel here. Okay, so I can take a paper towel, fold it over, and then put a rubber band on top, and that releases out. I could use a t-shirt or a tea towel to do the exact same thing. Or you can put, or you can put a mason jar lid on, but you'll have to burp it every day because it's going to be releasing gas and it could potentially explode. So that's why I don't put fast tightening lids on anything, because I'm just scared that I'll come home and it'll be exploded. If you're scared about exploding things, keep an airlock on or use plastic. Plastic doesn't explode in such a dangerous way like glass does. So this is your kraut. You're going to put it in a cool, dark place, not in direct sunlight. You're going to ferment it you can start tasting it at day 5. And it's done when you think it tastes delicious and it's not super salty. So that's up to you. So I've had sauerkraut that, has fermented for a week and tastes amazing. I've had sauerkraut that's fermented for 2.5, 3 months, and it tastes a lot different. It's a lot more sour, it's a lot more squishy, but it's still really good. So you decide when it's done. In the summer, things will ferment faster than in the winter because it's hot, and that just encourages the party to get even more intense faster. So sauerkraut, really good beginning ferment. So the second one I'm going to move on to is the one that you're probably familiar with, which is pickles. So super easy to ferment. Lacto-fermented pickles are kind of a staple, a deli staple, and oftentimes they were made in these huge vats and barrels where you would go get pickles out of a barrel, which I love the experience of like going to a store and like just reaching into a pickle barrel. To me, that's like heaven. But they're super sour. They have to have something tannic in them to get the lactofermentation process started and to keep it crunchy. So that's oak leaves or horseradish leaves or tea leaves or bay leaves or black currant leaves, which are super tannic. And so like traditional dill pickles are fermented from anywhere from like 5 days to a couple months, like sauerkraut. So for lacto-fermented pickles, you use a pickling spice, and then you have a brine. So I pre-made a brine here. So unlike sauerkraut, where we get the water from the cabbage, pickles, you want them to be crispy, and you don't want to like start squeezing them and mushing them together because that's super gross and nasty. So you want to add a brine, and the brine is 3 tablespoons salt, to 1 quart of water. So it's a really, really simple thing. So if you want to make lacto-fermented pickles, you take your cucumbers, you want to do spears or keep them whole. Slices get really mushy really fast, so you want to maintain the cell walls of the cucumber as much as possible. So unfortunately, I forgot to go over to my old house and raid my old herb garden, which is just exploding with growth. So I don't have any dill heads or dill itself, so I'm gonna have to use dill seed. But you know what? You don't have to make dill pickles. You can make any, if you don't like dill, don't put it in. It's really that simple. So got my wide mouth jar. I'm gonna throw my pickles in here. Oh, and I should say that you want to use pickling specific cucumbers for this. And the reason is silver slicers are amazing. They're one of my absolute favorite cucumbers. Lemon cucumbers, all types of fresh unique cucumbers. I could eat all day long. I eat like a cucumber a day. But they're different. The way that their kind of cell structures on the inside and the way their seeds are different. So the silver slicer, the seeds are a little bit bigger and there's a lot more pulp on the inside. Pickling cucumbers, the seeds are much smaller and there's a lot less of this kind of pulpy flesh. And that's what we want for pickles. So these work good for like fridge pickles where you'll brine them in a vinegar brine and eat them within a week. But they'll get really mushy really fast. These have been bred to make pickles. For like 1,000+ years, people have been breeding these to ferment them. So here's my jar. Everything fits pretty nicely in there. I make really simple pickles, right? So I'm gonna put 1 huge Sola Gratia clove of garlic in here. I just love, Sola Gratia is the best garlic. These are huge cloves, they're amazing. 1 clove of garlic. And then I like my pickles a little spicy, so I'm going to add a little bit of crushed red pepper in there. I'm going to add some black peppercorn. Like I said, I don't measure a lot of things, but I will, in the newsletter, I can send out all these recipes. So I just added about a teaspoon of black peppercorns. And then I really like mustard as a seasoning, so I'm going to add, I'll measure it out. I'm so bad about not measuring things when I'm making pickles. Another teaspoon coriander, and then I'm just going to like skip the dill because I don't think that we need it. So garlic, mustard, black pepper, garlic, and I think that's going to be it. There's, in like a pickling spice that you might buy at the store, it has mustard seeds, allspice berries, coriander, red pepper flakes. Sometimes it has ginger. I also need something tannic since we're lacto-fermenting this. So I should have brought currant leaves home, but I didn't think about it. So I'm just going to use bay leaves. So I'm going to take 2 small bay leaves and throw those in. And those are for taste as well as tannins. So the tannins help keep it crunchy. Okay, so here we go. All I'm going to do now, take my brine, and then I love these things. These are jar funnels. I'm going to pour my brine in over the top until it covers the pickles. So this is what it looks like all around. And I'm going to put a handy dandy airlock on it. I got these airlocks from, I gotta go where the reception is, so it's a little wonky. I got these from Soldiers from Health, and I absolutely love them. So I'm gonna ferment this in a cool, dark place for 5 days, and then I will taste them until I think they're ready. See, that's another good part about all this stuff is you just taste it till you like it. And then same thing with the sauerkraut, it's gonna go in the fridge to stop and slow down the fermentation process. So lacto-fermented pickles. So you can do this with all kinds of things. You can do it with green tomatoes. So for example, oh, never mind. Oh, here are some green tomatoes I made from last summer. And you may be asking yourself, oh my gosh, it's been in the fridge for like almost an entire year. What could it possibly taste like? So it's been in the fridge for a year. It smells the same as it did when I put it in the fridge. So it went from this to this through the fermentation process. So it got a little paler. The cell wall started breaking down a little bit. It's sour. It's a little salty. And it tastes just as good as the day I put it in the fridge, like a year ago. So you can keep fermented things in the fridge for about a year. But honestly, people eat fermented foods that have been in the ground or been fermenting for hundreds of years. There was literally 100-year tofu. So this process of fermentation is not something that's scary or dangerous, because it's something that people from around the world have been doing for thousands of years. Like, people know what they're doing. So this is a good, safe way to keep food. Okay, so we're halfway through our time together, and I could literally, like I said, talk all day about lactofermentation, because I just like love to do anything with it. But I'm going to move on to vinegar brining. This is something that a lot more folks are comfortable with, a lot more folks are familiar with, and it's just as easy as lactofermentation. And I would say probably easier, because you make your brine, you put it over your vegetables, and then they go into the fridge, or they get canned. I'm not teaching a canning class this year, but you can learn how to can through classes through Extension, Illinois Extension, or online, or I'm happy to talk about canning with any of you, because that's another way to keep things shelf stable, and you don't have to throw it in the fridge. So all the recipes I'm talking about today are recipes that have been tested for canning. So even though they're refrigerator pickles, these recipes are safe for canning as well. So they're kind of dual purpose. Okay, so let's move on to a refrigerator pickle. So I said that these poor silver slicers were not great for lactofermentation, but they're awesome for fridge pickles. So when we're making our fridge pickles, I'm going to cut them in a little different way. I already cut them in half. So we're going to do half moons instead of full sort of circles. But when you're making fridge pickles, especially out of silver slicers instead of pickling cucumbers, you want to make your slices a little bit bigger so they don't break down as fast. So I'm going to kind of do little chunks. So if you want to do like slices for sandwiches or hot dogs or things like that, use a different pickle besides silver slicers. But I love to eat these kind of like right out of the jar. I mean, I could eat a pickle whenever. So in goes our silver slicers. So here we go. What should we put in this one? I think I'm gonna go, I think I'm gonna go with an onion. I think I'm gonna go onion, and I'm gonna make some sweet ones. Let's make some bread and butter pickles. So for bread and butter pickles, there's no bread and there's no butter, but what makes it a bread and butter pickle is sugar. So you can either use cane sugar, white sugar from the store. And I'm sorry about the lighting that's going on right now. This is just where I got reception. So really, it's just what makes it bread and butter is just sweetness and onions. So what's mostly in bread and butter pickles is mustard seed, coriander, and they usually don't have dill in them. So if you're not a big dill person, this is the one for you. So I'm just gonna go 3 slices of white onion. Oh man, I put too much. I put too many pickles in. Let's do one more slice. in there. And then I'll do a tablespoon, or a teaspoon, I'm sorry, a teaspoon of coriander right in the bottom there. And then I'm going to add a little bit of honey. And you can add, if you're making a big batch of these, you can add your honey right to your brine. But just a little bit of honey from a friend of mine. And then we'll add our cucumbers. Okay, so we don't really have to worry about this being fully submerged in a brine because we're not lactofermenting it. The vinegar is going to kill, the vinegar and the salt are going to kill whatever's lurking in here. So there's not the health benefits in vinegar brines as there is in lactofermentation, but it is a great way to preserve veggies, and it's incredibly, incredibly delicious. Okay, so here's my vinegar brine. It had been on the stove, so the vinegar brine is 1 cup water, 1 tablespoon of salt, and 1 cup vinegar. So it's 1, 1, 1. 1 cup vinegar, 1 cup water, 1 tablespoon salt. So you can do this in the same way that I made the lactofermentation brine, where I just added salt to water and then shook it up. But I find it easier, especially with the vinegar, to dissolve it by bringing it up to a gentle boil, dissolving the salt, and then bringing it back down to room temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and pour this in. And boom, that's it. You put a lid on, you stick it in the fridge. You can eat these immediately, but they're usually better after about 48 hours. And then they're really good about day 3, and then you want to eat silver slicer cucumbers by like day 7. And you can reuse the brine. So you eat the veggies, and there's still this great brine left. I often reuse brines like 3 or 4 times, because then I could just keep getting, you know, like as much mileage out of something I made as possible. And you can change up what you put in there. So maybe we can put carrots in there next, or green tomatoes, anything that you want. Oftentimes we'll also pickle onions in leftover brines. John and I eat pickled onions like just about everything because it adds this like acidic bite when it's really lacking. So we make a lot of like veg and grain salads, and then the pickled onions on top just make it so much better. So we always have a jar of pickled onions in the fridge. And these are cheater onions, so I didn't even make a brine for these. This is literally sliced red onions, and then about 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar, and then a shake of sumac powder. So these are sumac pickled onions, and there's no salt in here at all because you don't really need it. And it's just like the easiest thing in the world, just to throw a little bit of vinegar on, shake it up, and then pull it out of the fridge. Okay. My work surface is getting a little cray right now. Okay, so let's move on to, one of my favorite things to make. Pickled carrots. Pickled carrots are like one of those things that I never really thought about until I tried one that my friend Jenna had made from some really ugly, gnarly farm carrots a couple years ago. And it was one of those things where like I took a bite of it and it like opened up some new place in my heart and my brain that I didn't know existed. So these are amazing rainbow carrots that are just like absolutely stunning. So these are gonna make some beautiful, beautiful pickled carrots. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna chop off the tops, and we're gonna use the tops in this recipe, but you can also make a really good pesto or feed it to your bunny or your buddy's bunny. or guinea pig. But the carrot tops are basically parsley. So they have a taste that's very, very similar to parsley. You can also freeze this, put it in your freezer, and then pull it out to make stock with onion skins and garlic skins and all types of things. And you can do that with Sola Gratia produce because it's organic. You wouldn't want to do a store-bought product because you're just then making an herbicide and pesticide soup, which is no good. So we have these amazing little carrots. So you can chop the bottoms off or not. You can chop the tops off or not. That's up to you. All of the part of the carrot is edible, so there's absolutely no need to do any trimming. I just did a quick little rinse on these, nothing more. And honestly, like the carrot, ooh, this is gonna do a little wash a little more. The carrot tops, when they get pickled, just turn into like delicious crunchiness. Okay, so I mentioned that fermentation and pickling is something that's practiced all around the world. And some of my favorite pickles come from the Middle East. And they have, they use chilies within their pickled vegetables. They use allspice. They're kind of like warming spices. And I think those go really well with carrots. And they especially go really well with radishes and things like that. But because we have some really great other produce from Sola Gratia, we're gonna make Mexican pickled carrots. So in addition to our carrots, in our brine, we're gonna put jalapenos. So I like to put whole jalapenos in with the pickles. And I went ahead and de-seeded them. And I like things really spicy. And John likes things a little less spicy. So sometimes I make things just for me, but sometimes I make things to share. So today I'm gonna make things, with John in mind, I'm gonna remove all the seeds. So when I make, say, like pickled jalapenos for myself, that I also put in just about everything, like these are jalapenos from last year, it's Seed City. I want it hot, I want it spicy, so I leave all those seeds in. But I'm gonna be nice and not do that. So I'm gonna use a big jar so we can keep these beautiful carrots intact. So I just gotta make sure that I can actually put a lid on this jar. I'm gonna make it super garlicky, so I'm gonna put 3 big cloves of garlic in the bottom. And I'm also going to, because we have some nice color to these carrots and this beautiful purple color, I'm gonna use a little bit of purple onion. So purple onion will turn your brine pink, which can be really awesome, but look really weird for things like cucumbers. But with these nice, beautiful carrots, it's gonna create just a great color. And along with the onions and the garlic, I'm also gonna add oregano from my garden, and this is Mexican oregano, as well as black peppercorn and cumin. So we'll go, for something this big, I'm actually gonna go 1 tablespoon of cumin and 1 tablespoon of black peppercorn, if I can find it. And I put black peppercorn in just about everything. Apparently I do everything with everything, but it's kind of true. I'm a Sagittarius, so. As the kids would say, I'm a kind of extra. I like variety and lots of spice. So these beautiful carrots are going in here. If I wasn't under the clock, I'd be arranging this to look really beautiful in the jar. But here's what it looks like right now. And easy peasy, everything's in the jar, I'm just gonna pour my vinegar brine on top of it here. Like this. Sorry, I don't wanna block the camera. And then this is ready to go into the fridge. So unlike the pickles, this is gonna take, oh, I forgot a carrot. Unlike the pickles, this is gonna take a little bit longer. So because carrots are just a super dense vegetable, they're a root vegetable, they have a lot less water content than cucumbers or things like tomatoes. So you're gonna wanna ferment, or you're gonna wanna keep this brine in the fridge for at least a week. And then that gives that time for all that flavor to get started to absorb in the carrots, and they'll get nice and crunchy. And they'll stay pretty crunchy for a couple months. So like the green tomato I ate was a little more mushy, even though it was super delicious, but carrots will keep their crunch. So I pickled some radishes in a brine maybe like a month ago or so. So radishes are similar to carrots. They're a super dense root vegetable. So this was garlic scapes and peppercorns and mustard seed. And unlike the mushy tomato, I'm sorry y'all, we gotta get some internet in this house. Anyway, I hope you heard the crunch. They stayed really crunchy. If you don't like radishes, you're not gonna like pickled radishes. Sometimes things, people will like things pickled that they won't like other ways. Radishes just get even funkier and weirder. So you really have to be kind of like a funky, oh man, sorry. Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left and I seem to be having some like major technical glitches. But I'd love to, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and send them through the chat. I have a couple more things I can make. We can make fermented cherry tomatoes, pickled lunchbox peppers, but I'd love to answer any questions that folks have. Or if you want to send a vegetable through the chat, we can talk about how you might ferment it or pickle it using a brine. And while those comments and questions might be coming in, I have one exciting thing that you're maybe not used to seeing. Where'd it go? These are lacto-fermented sour cherries. So you can ferment and brine pickle fruit as well as vegetables. And a really cool thing with these especially is you can see that this is the first time I'm tasting it. So we'll see how it tastes. Oh my god. Wow. I've never made these before. They're a little bit salty. They're sweet. You can definitely taste the tarragon and the thyme. These would be so good in a cocktail or in seltzer water. They'd be really good like in anywhere that you would put craisins, like a rice dish or like a couscous dish or anything savory with like lamb. And because they're lacto-fermented, they have a fizz to them. So when you lacto-ferment tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, for example, let's just throw some in here. When you lacto-ferment cherry tomatoes or fruit, there's a ton of sugar in those, like way more sugar than with vegetables. So when they start, when the bacteria starts burping, it gets, those kind of fizz bubbles get trapped within the fruit and within the brine. And like when you ferment cherry tomatoes, they just like explode explode in your mouth. They're so good. So maybe I'll just do maybe just do one thing of cherry tomatoes here, because these are truly the easiest thing to ferment in the world. You don't have to cut anything. You can literally just like rinse them, and then I like a little jalapeno in there, a little bit of garlic. Thyme is my favorite thing to put into many fermented things, but unfortunately I wasn't able to go to my garden and get some. So I'm just gonna leave this as garlic and jalapeno, and I'm gonna put no other spices in there because it's gonna ferment super fast. And these will ferment in like 1 day during the summer, and they'll get really fizzy within like 24 hours. So here's my cherry tomatoes. I'm gonna throw my brine on top here. And then I'm gonna use a fermentation weight, which is just gonna keep these submerged in the brine. Tomatoes are usually pretty good at that. And then this is a different type of airlock that lets air in, or air out but not in. And this is a little less intense than this type of airlock. So this goes on top, and then you'll just use a ball jar lid. And it's super cheap and really just easy to use and easy to clean. Oh man, these are terrible angles. But hopefully we can get through to the end. So one question that a lot of folks have is, okay, you have all of these fermented things, all of these brine pickles in your fridge, and they just fill up the shelves. Like our fridge is just like full of different types of pickles in ferments, and I use them in a million different ways. So I make a lot of coleslaw because I love cabbage. So we'll use pickled jalapenos, pickled poblanos, pickled tomatoes, pickled onions. All of those go into coleslaws, and they're just like a phenomenal acidic bite to that dish. The fermented sour cherries would be really great in rice dishes and things with lamb. What are some things? Sauerkraut. So one of my favorite ways to eat sauerkraut is to actually eat it with eggs. So instead of bread, I'll put a big dollop of sauerkraut in, and then 2 fried eggs. And it's if you eat dairy, then sour cream or yogurt is just really phenomenal on that as well. I think the Russians like have it down. Like they eat sauerkraut, and folks from Poland and in Eastern Europe eat a lot of sauerkraut, and they eat it with like dumplings and pierogies and sausages, and everything just like has a little bit of kraut. Same thing in the Middle East. Like pickled vegetables are a side dish with main meals or even breakfast. And then Asian traditions just have an incredible amount of fermented foods as part of stir fries, as part of main dishes, and then tofu and miso, which are staple fermented foods in those countries. So there's an incredible array of ways you can use them. And when you make a lot of pickles, you eat all the vegetables, you have this leftover brine, so you can add more pickles to those brines, or you can make drinks with them. So for things like these awesome fermented carrots here, or for pickle brine, they go amazing in Bloody Marys. So like virgin or alcoholic Bloody Marys, adding a little bit of brine to that just like elevates the drink. Picklebacks have been popular in bars for a couple of years now. So a shot of whiskey or a hard liquor followed by a shot of pickle juice. And for farmers and those of us that spend a lot of time outside or in the field, or you do a lot of outdoor activity and you sweat a lot, pickle brine and salty brines can be a really good recovery agent because you've lost a lot of salt in your sweat. So oftentimes, especially in the heat of the summer in August now, I bring pickles with me into the field. And even if I don't have pickles, then I'll just bring a little bit of brine, and that basically acts as a type of Gatorade that we can make ourselves and isn't loaded with a ton of chemicals or a ton of sugar. So I'm going to be sending these recipes along to folks that joined us here, as well as folks in the CSA. And one really great thing is that I can be a little loosey-goosey with my recipes and my seasonings, but I'll be sending along all types of different pickling spices, different combinations, different things that you can use these brines to pickle, including like fan favorites like dilly beans and sweet pickled peppers and banana peppers. You can use Hungarian wax peppers or similar ones, as well as different things to ferment. So, you know, like I had some of the usual suspects today that you might find in pickles or brines, but you know, turnips are delicious pickled. Okra is a really great one. I make a sweet and spicy chard stems, pickled chard stem recipe. So if you come to my Eat Those Greens class that's coming up near the end of the season, we're gonna make those sweet and spicy pickled chard stems, watermelon rinds and radish pods. Kind of the list is endless. So I love talking fermentation, so feel free to reach out, or if you see me out and about, track me down and we can talk all things pickle. And I'm always happy to share recipes as well as things that are fermenting in my kitchen right now. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much to Sola Gratia for hosting me, for the amazing veg. And I'm so excited to be part of this community that not only is nourishing ourselves as CSA members and supporters of the farm, but so many of our neighbors here in the Champaign-Urbana area. So go out and support Sola Gratia and all of their efforts, and I look forward to eating pickles with you soon. Bye everyone, happy summer.